This is Indie Book Publishing. Indie Book Publishing is a show about new books and the authors who wrote them. It's an opportunity for prospective readers to hear directly from the writers, to hear what inspired them to write and publish, and to hear all the inside details about their books. And now, Indie Book Publishing with your host, Steve Jorgensen.
The title of the book, 37 Things I'd Wish I Had Known Before My Divorce. Learning how to save time, money, your kids, and yourself. And the co-authors join us, Nicole Fewer and Francine Barris. Lynn Prowitt is not here with us today, but Nicole and Francine are, and welcome, ladies.
Thank you.
Great to have you with us. Now, you say, besides the great title, which I think explains it pretty well, but, you know, this book is full of great tips, lists, and how-tos. It'll help you emotionally and practically, and, of course, after countless hours of training, experience, research, and collaboration between a therapist, a mediator, and a writer, voila, the book, 37 Things. That must have been quite a job to pare it down to 37 things, Nicole.
Yes, well, this book could have been 1,000 things, but we wanted to create a book that was easy to read, simple, and really has in it everything that we found people ask when we work with them and in our divorce advisory practice. There are basics that everyone should know when they're entering the divorce process. And so we put in there, as I said, the things that everybody seems to commonly ask and things we feel they should really know. We've condensed it down and made it simple and easy to read.
Well, before we get into the different principles that you're going to focus on, let's start with you, Francine. Tell us a little bit about your background, and then, Nicole, you can share as well.
Okay. Well, I am, first of all, a child of divorce, although I am now married 47 happy years. So I could see both sides of it, you might say that. Also, I'm, for 35 years, a family and child specialist, and I had a family practice and child practice in New York City for the last 30 years. So I've seen it all. I've had loads of experience with children and families, and I really understand what each of them need. And I've brought this to this book.
Nicole.
Yes. Hi. So I am a trained divorce mediator, and I worked as well in New York City with a private mediation practice, and now have a divorce advisory business in Connecticut, and we speak to people over the phone or in person and offer support groups, helping people through the process. And in 2009, I unfortunately went through my own divorce with 2 small children. So between the 2 of us, we've taken all of our personal and professional experience and put it into this book.
Well, and children, that's the biggest issue, isn't it?
Yes, it actually is the biggest issue, and the one that really speaks to our hearts. And really putting children first is the motto of this book.
Putting children first, and that must be a challenge, especially when there's pain going on all around the children with the husband and wife, mom and dad.
Yeah, we work very close with couples, even in our practice, to show them ways in which to keep that kind of conflict away from the children. And even though, of course, divorce is riddled with problems and conflict, there are so many things that people can do to shield their children from that and make their lives not wreak havoc during that time. And kids really are faring much better because this kind of information is more out there today than it used to be. People are trying a lot harder to put their kids first and save them from the turmoil of divorce.
The so-called stigma of divorce has changed over the decades. Today it's a whole lot different than it was back in the 50s, 60s, 70s.
For sure.
Not enough, though, as far as I'm concerned. The stigma is still there. People are still ashamed of getting divorced. They see it as a failure. I don't think that the culture has actually really supported divorced people the way they should. Big companies still don't want to be associated with people that have gotten divorced. They want to shy away from it. It seems to still be a negative word. We really did hope that this book would, in fact, lighten up the idea that you actually could succeed And like my daughter always says, your marriage might have failed, but your divorce could be a success. And we really, really feel that way. And if people got the right information, they understood the really important things to do to get a low-conflict divorce, then your children will be okay and your family can continue on.
And I'll just add, yes, I agree the stigma is still around, but I think it has changed quite a bit since the 50s. I think that people are congratulating. I hear a lot of congratulations. You wouldn't have heard that back then. I think people do realize that it is becoming very common. 50% of marriages end in divorce. And there is more support out there than there used to be. There's support groups. There's parties for divorce. There's now a divorce night event coming up in New York City where it's just an event for divorcees. So I think that the stigma is getting better, although it is still there. I think people still feel ashamed, but there's more support around people getting divorced than there was before.
Part 1 of your book, Should I Stay or Should I Go? What an incredible question.
It's a hard one.
So how do you help people through that? Because obviously there may be moments when somebody may say, I can't take this anymore, but there may be some way to fix it.
I think that that's one of the more difficult questions, and it really does take statistically about 5 to 8 years to make that decision. People sit on that decision for a very long time, and so it is very difficult. But I think our book does point out the things that you need to think about and the things you need to question before you make that decision. And my favorite part of that book is the teepee, because when that little lady looks out of that teepee or the guy and says, I'd rather live in here than live with that person, you've made that decision. And I always thought that was a great visual.
Yeah, I think that people do stay for a variety of reasons, maybe too long for the sake of their children because they're afraid to be alone, or they're worried they're not going to be able to financially afford the divorce. So, you know, what we do see in our practice is people stay until the very bitter end, until they really just can't take it anymore. People don't want to get divorced, and it's usually the last option that they have. Things have just gotten really bad between the couple. But as Francine said, it does take sometimes 5 to 10 years to make that decision. And we do help people talk through it and do it well when they do finally get divorced, if they do. But we also always recommend that they see a therapist, hopefully with their spouse, and try to work things out.
Part 2, okay, you're getting a divorce, so tell us some of the biggest mistakes people make when getting divorced.
The first phone call should not be to an attorney. That is, I think, the biggest mistake that we have seen through the years that we've been working. There's a lot of homework to do before you call that attorney, and the attorney might not even be the right person to call. So you need to get an education about the divorce options. And if anything is the most serious part of our book, it's about the divorce options. It's about learning what you can do beside calling an attorney.
Yeah, today you have so many other options. Litigation is not your only option. There's mediation, there's collaborative, there's more peaceful ways to get divorced. So we always recommend people at least think about those options. And as Francine said, it's going straight to an attorney can just wreak havoc on everybody. You need to do your homework, find out what your rights are, learn about how to help your kids, and do all of those things before you start the process.
Well, it sounds like when you've made the decision, like you've just pointed out, you'd rather live in a teepee than live with that person. So a lot of emotion here, a lot of real anger, a lot of stuff going on. So there's got to be, what I'm hearing, is somehow a cooling down period before you start deciding how you're gonna go through it.
Well, that's very interesting you say that, because I always recommend that. And when I see a lot of heightened emotion and people screaming or getting angry, sometimes they just need that time to separate and live apart for a while and calm things down and give it thought. And sometimes you have one person that wants to do that and one that just wants to get divorced immediately. And that's the person that you want to try to, talk to and say, there's no rush here. I think rushing into things is definitely a mistake that people make, and they don't take the time to make the right decisions because they're in such a rush to get it over with. So taking a deep breath, separating, and figuring things out slowly is always the best way to go.
And what's the hardest part of divorce on kids?
On children?
The hardest part of divorce for children is conflict. Low conflict divorce produces for children a better outcome. If you have parents screaming at each other, if children are asked to choose which parent they like the best, if a child is asked to report about the other parent to the other parent, all of those things are very destructive. Yelling in front of children is the most destructive thing that you can do. So peaceful divorce, low conflict divorce, and children will come out okay.
And it's good to point out while she brings it up that, staying married, an intact family, and yelling is just as harmful as getting divorced and yelling. So when we have couples come into our office and they're screaming at each other and they want to stay married for the kids' sake, we kind of chuckle, even though it's not funny, and say staying together in this kind of conflict is just as harmful for your children. They would be better off if you were to separate peacefully and learn to get along. So there can be benefits to divorce if you can live in a peaceful way together. And I think my ex-husband and I are a perfect example of that. We did not get along well married. We lived in a very high conflict tension home, and now that we're separated, we've been divorced 4 years, we get along so well. We actually laugh and say we wish we'd gotten along this well when we were married. But sometimes you can't. Sometimes you have to be apart to be able to co-parent and get along. And my kids are thriving and doing well, and I always remind them that Dad and I could not get along living together, and why they're better for us not being together. And I think my kids understand that and would agree.
So dads being more involved today than they used to be is really an important part of this.
Definitely. I mean, research shows that children need both parents to be involved. And I think, again, it's very sad when you see one parent, trying to take their child away from the other parent. They need to understand that kids really need both parents in their lives. And that is something we really push in our practice as well. Just because you're angry at your spouse or they wronged you in some way, they're still the father or mother of that child, and they have a right to be a parent, and the children have a right to have both parents in their lives. And that's such an important point.
So your book is easy to read, easy to understand.
This was really purposely done. We thought about this a lot because people that are going through divorce, as you've mentioned before, are highly emotional. And it's really, really hard when you're going through an emotional transition like this to be able to read a lot of things. There's a lot of information out there, but to go through it when you're feeling so tense and upset is really not going to happen. So we felt our book at least is clear, it's concise, it's easy. You can put it in your pocketbook or your briefcase on the way to work. There are things to download from the back of it, forms and things that will help you out. So it's really a user-friendly book, and we hope that people will go out and use it.
Francine, I think one of your favorite tips you've already shared with us concerning the teepee. If you're rather be in the teepee than live with that person anymore. Before we find out about how to get your book, Nicole, what's your favorite tip in the book?
Oh, boy. There's so many. You know what? I know this seems a little boring, but one of my favorite things I use over and over, even post-divorce, is our budget form. It's not an exciting part of the book, but it's such a useful and important piece. When people are getting divorced, it's amazing how little they know about their finances, and I feel like it's such an important piece. It really helps to reduce your stress if you understand how much money you have, how much you will have going forward. We have a really extensive budget form in the back of the book that I think everybody should make copies of and create a current budget form and then your future. What can you afford going forward? And it's such a useful tool. So everybody that sees that says, oh, I love your budget form. So I'd say that's one of the really good things that we put in there. We're really careful in taking, as I said, so much information that's out there and really choosing each section so carefully. And I think the book is so useful for anybody, men and women, getting divorced.
Francine, tell us how to get your book, 37 Things I Wish I'd Known Before My Divorce.
Well, you can go on our website, sosdivorceadvisors.com, and you can get the book there. You can get it on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and certainly through Balboa Press.
Nicole Fewer and Francine Barris, thank you so much for joining us on Indie Book Publishing.
Thank you for having us.
And this interview has been brought to everyone by Balboa Press.
You've been listening to Indie Book Publishing with your host, Steve Jorgensen. Join us again next week at noon Eastern as Steve interviews another great author.